Escorting ships through the Strait of Hormuz and protecting them is essentially impossible. It's incredibly resource intensive. We would basically need to use our entire Navy while also calling on other powers to support us in that effort. It's incredibly easy to close it, incredibly hard to keep it open. Because, again, we're talking about civilian cargo vessels. They travel about 20 miles per hour, and they are not armored at all. And the vast majority of them, or at least the ones that people are mostly concerned with, are filled with chemicals used for fertilizer, very explosive, or oil, also very explosive. Realistically, as long as the threat is there in any capacity, right? It doesn't have to be anything crazy, right? As long as the threat of any ship getting hit even a little bit is there, the strait is effectively closed.
Hello, I'm Fraser Myers, Deputy Editor of Spiked. It's been around 7 weeks since the US and Israel launched their strikes on Iran. We are currently in the middle of a ceasefire as the US and Donald Trump try to bring the Iranians to the negotiating table. But there is also a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, the waterway through which about a fifth of the world's oil flows. Today, we're going to put the geopolitics to one side and talk a little bit more about what's happening on the ground. And for that, I am absolutely delighted to be joined by Justin Taylor. Justin, can you introduce yourself a little bit? Tell the viewers who might not know you a little bit about yourself and your channel. I'm very keen to get into some of the things that you talk about on there. And one thing you say is that you're not afraid to ask the dumb questions, and hopefully, I have some good dumb questions for you today.
Yeah, hey, so as you said, my name's Justin Taylor. I'm a West Point graduate here in the United States. I was an infantry officer, active duty in the U.S. Army for about a little over 6 years. Got out, and now I do geopolitics, military covering full time now. So, yeah, and like you said, my goal kind of with everything isn't just report things. It's to add a little bit of nuance. You get a lot of extremes because the way I present things is that things are both more exciting and more boring than people realize. So I try to bring that perspective, that on the ground perspective, to bigger ideas that people might miss.
Great, and let's kick off by talking about the blockade that's ongoing. I mean, it might sound obvious, but perhaps it isn't. What actually is a blockade in this context? How does it work? What is the US actually doing to prevent ships going through the Strait of Hormuz?
Yeah, blockades are kind of one of those ideas or strategies that seem super obvious, but there's a little bit more that goes into it. There are two basic forms. You have a military and a commercial blockade. A military blockade would be surrounding an island before you want to take it over, isolating it. That is not what we're doing here. We're doing a commercial blockade. That has a little bit more nuance to it in terms of legality. Personally, I'm of the opinion, after doing more research on it, that questions on legality, I've heard some people argue that it's not legal, it is legal, this, that, and the other. Those kind of arguments don't really carry a lot of weight. There's no one agreed upon idea of legality. Doesn't mean you can't argue something's good or bad ethically, or if it's effective or ineffective. But the real question you have to look at is it effective? But blockade's fairly simple as a concept, right? You block off an area, typically with naval and air power. Don't let anything in or out. The specifics with this blockade, and it's pertinent to it being a commercial blockade, is that there's three basic rules you have to follow. One is that you have to essentially be effective, meaning we actually have to have the assets in place to do this blockade, which we do. The Strait of Hormuz is as we say in military terms, a fatal funnel, right? It's a very narrow, predictable path. It applies to other things. It could be a hallway, could be a door, could be a window, could be, in this case, a large waterway. But everything has to go in and out of it, meaning it's very easy for us to block it off. So the stat that I hear people brag the United States is using only less than 10% of their navy to block it off. Well, yeah, it's the equivalent of a hallway, right? You don't need the whole navy to block off what's essentially a water hallway. So it has to be effective. And what that means is Basically, it allows us to enforce it fully because for it to be a legal blockade, a legal commercial blockade, we have to target any ships going into and out of Iran if those are the perimeters that we're setting. So it doesn't matter if it's flagged to Liberia or any of the other, flagging of conveniences countries or to China or even to the United States. We could blockade ourselves if some crew was deciding to get extra excited that day. And so the legality of it is one thing, but it is by nature effective. And we've already seen this happening. We've boarded ships. The fact that we've had to board ships is interesting. If you look at the grand scale things, because all the news highlights right now are talking about, you know, we shot the engine room of a recent Iranian vessel trying to get into Iran, or that we boarded and took over a Iranian flagship in the Indo-Pacific region. Those are very much outliers. The reality is that blockades are very effective, especially commercial blockades, because the vast majority of ships either A, aren't bothering to even load up cargo. They're not even going to try. They're just going to sit there, eat the costs, and run as low at operating costs as possible. Or two, which we've seen a lot of, especially with Chinese related ships, is they will just immediately comply, right? We don't have to do anything. We just send them a little radio traffic, say, hey, turn around, and they turn around. So ultimately, this is effective in the sense that you are able to stop ships. And the few ships that we have had to stop, we've been able to do relatively easily, right? This isn't a military target we're going after. It's a cargo ship designed for civilian use. It doesn't have armor. It's not weaponed. It doesn't have weird sensors that can try to evade us or armor plating or whatever you want to call it. The most they can do is turn off their transponders. But when you're a ship that's quite literally 1,000 feet long, right, over 300 meters, it's not hard to find it, right? You fly one plane over, you can see pretty much everything. Ultimately, it's effective in that it's blocking traffic. It's another question if it's working at a strategic level, right? Achieving those strategic goals. But ultimately, this is just another way of all the other things we were seeing, right? It's another flavor of squeezing Iran economically through military efforts, though it's not quite bombing Iran or threatening to invade, take over Kharg Island or any of the other islands or whatever you want to call it.
And a lot of people might not know what it means. You hear this phrase that Iran has closed the Strait of Hormuz. It's just sort of used a lot in the news reporting. But what does that actually mean? And why would it have been so difficult, say, for the Americans to open it, say, through military force or through a military response? Why have they gone through this blockade as like the least worst option?
So it kind of boils down to what I said earlier, right? In order for us to force the blockade open, I am of the opinion, and many people agree with me, is that escorting ships through the Strait of Hormuz and protecting them is essentially impossible. It's it's like saying, could we? Yes, but could I also fill up the Grand Canyon with a spoon and sand? Eventually, yeah, I could fill up the Grand Canyon. That's a very large area for non-Americans who maybe don't know what the Grand Canyon is. I'm essentially describing a technically possible but theoretically impossible task. It's incredibly resource intensive. We would basically need to use our entire navy while also calling on other powers to support us in that effort. And the issue it comes down to is that all it would take for Iran to effectively close it, right? And if you want to use a good definition of closed, it would be that commercial shipping, civilian commercial shipping, are unwilling to use it, right? Um, at least without paying protection money to Iran, as we've seen, that kind of thing. A whole other discussion topic. But really, it's incredibly easy to close it, incredibly hard to keep it open. Because again, we were talking about civilian cargo vessels. They've traveled about 20 miles per hour. I don't know what that is in knots. I was not in the Navy. I was in the Army. I go by miles per hour. And they are not armored at all. and the vast majority of them, or at least the ones that people are mostly concerned with, are filled with chemicals used for fertilizer, very explosive, or oil, also very explosive. These ships were built with the engineering redundancies that you would need. Oh, if there's a leak or maybe there's a small fire, if something breaks, right? They weren't designed to absorb a drone or anti-missile ship or any kind of munition at all. So, one, any hit is going to be devastating. Two, civilian industry obviously is going to be much less accepting of risk than a military one, right? If one ship gets damaged, and damaging an oil tanker is a very very big deal, right? Insurance rates are going to go through the roof. Everyone's talking about the shipping insurance rates. The cost of everything is going to go up, right? Because fewer people are going to be willing to take that job. You're going to have to pay crews exponentially more money. And the amount of time that your ship is down, it's not just the loss of your ship that you'd be losing in that scenario, right? It's all the cargo that it's carrying and all the future cargo that it was carrying and the replacements and the repairs and the time down. And so from an economic perspective and simply from a I am a civilian, merchant marine guy, I did not sign up to join in on any war and unwillingness to do so. And I don't mean that in a disparaging way whatsoever. I would never expect, a random guy from Eastern Europe who's just doing this for a paycheck to, you know, tighten his belt up a little bit and just be ready to get hit with an anti-ship missile designed to take out American destroyers. Realistically, as long as the threat is there in any capacity, right? It doesn't have to be anything crazy, right? As long as the threat of any ship getting hit even a little bit is there, the strait is effectively closed. And all that would take is one drone a week, even if the drone doesn't hit anything, or even if the missile doesn't hit anything, or the boat gets destroyed before it reaches the civilian tanker or the cargo ship or whatever, no one's going to use it. Full stop. And we've seen that over the last 7 weeks, with ongoing civilian traffic being essentially zero. Right, this is a strait that saw typically, I want to say, 120 ships, if I remember correctly, a day, and at its highest peak over the last 7-ish weeks, we've seen maybe 30 as the highest point, and that was, like, in a brief window when both parties agreed not to do anything, and now it's back down again, and there's been a lot of confusion over that, but as long as the threat is still there, there's nothing no civilian ships are going to use it. And I really need people to appreciate that in order for us to fully 100% eliminate that threat in the strait, it is essentially impossible. That would mean we would need to intercept every single drone, every single missile, every single everything that went that way, which is one short of impossible, right? That's assuming a 100% success rate. And we could have a 99.99% success rate and it's still going to be closed, right? So, and we've seen in the past, right? We've seen some of our escort ships, ships literally designed to escort other ships, not being able to engage things like the explosive drone boats that Iran sends, right? We don't have the capacity to defend against those kinds of threats, right? We expected to be fighting large aircraft. It's important to keep in mind all of these Navy ships that we have were minus a couple aircraft carriers, which themselves really the weapons are the aircraft, and that's a little bit of a non-discussion there. But all the other ships that we would primarily be using for these kinds of escort missions were designed in the Cold War, primarily designed to do Cold War style defense and escorts. And we did do that back in the 80s during the tanker wars when Iran and Iraq were same thing, Strait of Hormuz, blowing up ships, trying to affect each other's economy. And even then, when we were fighting defending ships from assets that were essentially Soviet export leftovers, right? The bottom of the barrel in terms of military equipment. And we were successful at that. That's largely deemed as a success in the tanker wars. I think it's called Operation Earnest Will. You can look it up later. Earnest Will and Praying Mantis were the two things we did back then. Tankers were still blown up. Traffic was reduced incredibly so, to a fraction of what it was, and it was about at the same rates as it is today. Um, it's incredibly complex, and so not only would we would run out of ammo if we did that very quickly. We would wear our assets, our aircraft, our ships that are already being pretty worn down with maintenance issues, even faster, right? It's not a part of the world where it's easy for us to necessarily get more stuff in, right? And and we still would not be successful. It is an essentially impossible military task. And I think people might be confused hearing that, seeing that, oh, we just spent the last, 7 or 8 weeks blowing up all of Iran's navy and all of Iran's equipment, and we're doing low flies in the middle of their country and a bright sunny day and nothing's happening to us, right? Why are we being so successful there? And but we can't defend a single cargo ship in a narrow place. Those are two completely different mission sets. They're about as far apart as you possibly can get. And to Iran's benefit, the things that they are hitting those civilian ships with, they're very easy to hide, they're very cheap, and they're very effective for what they are. Uh, Drones are obviously incredibly cheap, easy to use. Anti-ship missiles can be hidden, brought out somewhere, launched, hidden again.
Yeah.
Classic asymmetric threat, right? They're not going to just sit there, stick their flag in the ground, and be like, all right, we are going to launch this and we're going to play on an even playing ground, essentially. And then if you look at the coastline of Iran on the northern part of the Strait of Hormuz, the southern portion of Iran, there are naturally a lot of shipping port areas there, right? Tons of cargo trucks and civilian traffic going in and out. Any of the weapons that they are hitting those ships with can be crammed by the dozens into those things. They can be crammed into the dozens of those, put out on the side of the road, launched, put back on the truck, drive off. And the another important factor is that the time window we have between launch and impact is incredibly minuscule, right? Uh, we have the means to intercept longer range missiles, right? Even if they're bigger, more technically complex, go faster, more expensive, all the shiny bits that people like to talk about, right? And one of the reasons we can do that is because they're very high up and they're in the air for a while. We have the window of opportunity to identify them, track it, figure out where it's going to land, decide to intercept it, launch multiple interceptors at it, and take it out. With a drone or a kamikaze boat, if you want to call it that, you have seconds, maybe minutes, very small uh, targets that are inherently hard to track, inherently hard to hit. And even if we do hit them, right, we don't have any dedicated munitions as it stands now that can take those out effectively in a cost effective method. Um, and the weapon systems that we do are more for self defense, not for defending external things, right? So, yes, we have cannons on our destroyers that fire very cheap munitions and are very effective at hitting those small, fast moving targets at the last second, but they are designed to protect that ship itself. They are not designed to protect other ships. And so in that window, we would essentially have to get lucky every single time. We would have to have a 100% success rate, and Iran only has to get lucky, doesn't even have to get lucky. Just as long as the threat is still there, it's
Yeah.
possible. And we would have to be rotating ships in and out. Most ship munitions that we would use to take out these kinds of things can't be reloaded at sea, so we have to pull it back and put something else in, and we're just wearing everything down and creating this huge logistics chain from the United States to that area into those ports. And it's a logistical nightmare. It's wearing down our equipment like crazy. We've already started running out of certain kinds of munitions that would be used to target this kind of thing. I read recently that one unit used all of the U.S. Army's prisms, which is like our new ground strike missile thing. We're out of them. All of the munitions that we've been using to protect these things are in the millions of dollars, right? And we would have to be firing them constantly, building up new production capacity for them, all these things. So there's a mountain. I'm sorry, I just kind of went on a tangent there to answer your question, but there's a million and a half things you could talk about that make it to where defending that strait is essentially impossible. And even if we manage to, again, if we were 99.999% effective, right? Strait's still closed. Iran still has 40% of its munitions available right now. And they're all munitions that can be hidden. We would not be able to find them, realistically speaking, unless we literally went in and looked at everything in person. And they only need to fire one or two, and they're good. The metaphor I use is that finding those munitions in those kinds of areas, those port areas with lots of roads going to them, so it's very easy to get in and out. It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack, but the needle is also inside of a piece of hay, and all of the other pieces of hay have civilians in them. So it's essentially a fool's errand. It's an impossible task. And so, long way around to answer your question. If the blockade is a way of applying economic pressure so that we gain some leverage, because the Strait of Hormuz is nothing but leverage for Iran. The blockade is for us to gain some of that leverage back, uh, because there's been no real efforts to try to force it open, which I think ultimately was the smart move. And I think the a blockade is the more effective way of. It's kind of one of those not sexy things, right? It's not big, it's not flashy. We just have a bunch of ships sitting at the opening of the Strait of Hormuz back a little bit, but it's not trying to defeat them in a military sense because, like I said, the way we would have to do it is basically impossible. It's regaining that leverage economically to have a position of negotiation where we would be able to try to work our way through opening the strait with whatever concessions that would look like without expending huge amounts of money, wearing down our equipment, running out of ammo, all the negative things that are coming out of it.
And one of the other options that's been put forward as a potential way of exercising economic leverage is taking over Kharg Island. Um, Presumably, that would involve some sort of ground invasion. It would be a major escalation. Do you think that that is similarly impossible, or a step down from impossible? But how sensible would that be? Would it be reckless? What's your take on it?
Is it possible? Absolutely. If you look at it strictly from does the United States have the capability to take over that island? Yes. Personally, I think it would be relatively, in famous last words, it would be a relatively straightforward, simple military operation. The U.S. is very good at the offense. We're good at taking ground. We're good at going in, blowing stuff up, right? Um, Holding the island, totally different issue. Um, Putting troops on that island would be, in my opinion, incredibly reckless. I've said this on other things as well. Incredibly reckless. Uh, we are already struggling with countering the weapons that Iran is throwing at us as it stands. If you put troops on Kharg Island, they are now in range of a whole slew of additional weapon systems that Iran has, right? So, uh, Shahed drones, for example, would be much more effective hitting us at Kharg Island. They're not so good at hitting uh, the civilian cargo ships as much because they're GPS guided, so they have no way of tracking a moving target effectively. But if you stick a bunch of guys on an island, then with obvious points of this is a place they're going to want to take over, this is a key point that they're going to want to hold, just keep hitting it with cheap Shaheeds. You could very easily start seeing long range FPV drones, right? We've already seen some footage of FPV drones flying basically unopposed for the most part over Iraq, in hitting our stuff, right? Hitting our bases. And those are theoretically the more protected areas that we would have, right? And we have no way of counting them on our well protected areas. You send a bunch of guys onto an island that's even closer, and more weapons are are now in range of US forces. We don't have a realistic way of taking them out. We have a few ad hoc methods of anti-drone gun scopes, and a lucky shot with a shotgun, but that's essentially what they are. Our only counter to those new weapons that would be in range of are lucky shots. Not just hard, not just difficult, not just expensive, but lucky. And that is a huge risk that I don't think any military planer would, should, or wants to take. Would it shut down Kharg Island as an economic output? Yes, theoretically, right? But so does the blockade. Blockade does the same thing. So realistically, could we take Kharg Island? Yes. Is it reckless and pointless? Yes. And it was pointless before we even did the start of the blockade. Uh, could we take it? Yes. Is it a good idea? No. Would we lose a bunch of guys during the initial assault? Probably not. Would we slowly just every day? Hey, another Marine was wounded. 2 Marines were wounded the next day. 2 days before that, a truck got blown up. That would be a daily occurrence, right? Um, and I think any kind of thing like that would be more symbolic than it would be practical because, like I said, the blockade achieves that goal just as well uh, without putting troops in harm's way in that manner.
And what about, I mean, this might sound completely nuts, and I want to caveat this by saying I think it would be nuts too. But what about the actual like nuclear option? And I ask this because you've done a great video on it, but also there have been rumors that it's something that Trump has considered, and he's been accused of having to be talked down from it. Um, Beyond the obvious reason, the obvious moral reasons of why it's wrong to vaporize large parts of a foreign country. Why is it also militarily a bad idea, do you think?
Nukes are, the way I put it, they are good for two things. They are good for preventing one country from nuking you or punishing the other country if they nuke you. They do not make good military weapons at a tactical and strategic level. Um, uh, they're not good for going on the offense, right? And they don't solve any of our problems, and they just make a lot of problems worse. And I made that video and I made that discussion just to kind of counteract the kind of some of the response that I've seen of, why are we even bothering doing this? Why don't we just blow everything up? Why don't we just, create a nuclear parking lot and over there and just be done with the whole thing? And my argument is that it's reckless and it doesn't. And again, like my point with that was we won't even try to look at it from the ethical standpoint because I feel like I won't reach anyone on that. But from a military strategic standpoint, it doesn't make any sense. The international fallout, no pun intended, from that would be so devastating it would change American history essentially forever. No amount of military success after we drop a nuke would change the overwhelming net loss that we would have in that scenario. Iran's equipment and their chain of command and basically everything is very dispersed. They operate very in a very dispersed way, both at a symbolic administrative level and also in a literal physical. Their stuff is spread out and hidden way, and so the way I describe it is that if you nuke an area, right, it's not a better way of destroying. It's not going to more effectively destroy whatever it is we're trying to destroy. It's going to be very effective at just destroying the stuff around the unrelated stuff around the things we're trying to destroy. It would essentially shut down the Strait of Hormuz indefinitely, and by indefinitely I mean decades, right? Because absolutely no private enterprise is going to be utilizing a region of the world that happens to have mushroom clouds historically rising over it. It's not even from a nuclear fallout section, this, that, or the other. And I think also people get the idea that there's a few ways of looking at it. Um, some people are saying just crater the whole coastline on the strait, and then we don't have to worry about them bringing anything in. That doesn't really solve our problems. Most of the stuff is being brought in from other areas, right? So you would just wipe out maybe a small fraction of the things we're worried about, and everything else that's sitting somewhere else can just be brought in, right? Problem still remains. Longer range munitions that don't have to be close to where the strait is still an issue. Nukes are powerful, but they're not, they're not going to very evenly just cut in, right? Regardless, we would still have to defend hundreds of miles of airspace, both around and deep. Something very not hard to do if we want air superiority or air supremacy. Hard to do again if we were defending the strait. It's a different kind of mission. And another thing that people say is, all the underground. We keep hearing about the underground bunkers, the underground commandos, the underground storage facilities where they're keeping all of these weapons. Nukes don't do well hitting deep underground targets hidden in hard rock mountains. That's why everyone, including the United States, puts all of their very important command and control, logistics, missile hub things in the ground or in the side of a mountain, right? You look at the Cheyenne Mountain Complex here in the United States. It's one of our most important strategic headquarters deep in a mountain, specifically so that it can survive a nuke. And Iran, it's always very unwise to just characterize, satirize the people you're fighting, and just assume that they don't know anything and they're just a bunch of dumb whatever. It's the classic: you never underestimate your enemy, right? They know how to adapt. They have adapted. We hit them at the 12-day war at Operation Midnight Hammer, right? They saw our capabilities with our large or massive ordnance penetrators, the MOPS, right? The big bombs that go really deep in the ground, they explode, they collapse things, right? They saw that, they're like, all right, how do we adapt? They don't even need to change anything major, right, to adapt to that kind of thing. All they had to do is build a few more entrances and exits, and suddenly that wildly complicates the entire thing. Trying to just drop a nuke on an underground bunker in a mountain, it's not feasible. It's not going to fix anything. The U.S. has tried it. We even had a dedicated bunker busting nuke program back in the early 2000s when we were, as still involved more in Iraq and Afghanistan to a higher degree because we saw Iran as a threat, still them, and everyone came to the conclusion, the military and federal government included, that this does not work. Nukes are very fragile weapon systems by nature, so and obviously if you impact the ground really hard and really fast and try to dig deep into it, creates a lot of force inside the munition itself. And I want to say the deepest that you could get a nuke is 6 feet before it just breaks and it can't go off anymore because it's a very sensitive, very controlled science experiment basically inside each one of those things. And they still don't work. And they just kick up a lot of fallout. And now, yes, you have a big hole in the side of the mountain. The bunker's still there. Maybe it collapsed a few entrances and airways, not all of them. All the munitions are fine. And now you have this massive wave of, radioactive fallout because you kicked up a bunch of radioactive dirt everywhere. And so you're solving no issues. And that's kind of one of those things I mentioned earlier, that there's a lot more nuance. Things are a lot more boring than people might imagine. But, if we want to just if the United States wants to just keep hitting Iran with conventional munitions, it can, right? It literally can. No one, we could drop more explosives, conventional explosives on that country than would equal one or two nukes. And we might even be closing in on that point after 2 months now. And that's instant. It's way more effective than any other kind of nuclear escalation that would also just change history for the worse, achieve zero military objectives, and and basically put the whole world behind Iran at that point if we pulled something like that.
I wanted to ask you about a more positive story, the rescue of the US fighter pilot behind enemy lines. I'm sure the film rights have already been
Oh
sold
yeah.
already to it.
We got
um,
I'm sure there's about 10 books already, being drafted as we speak.
yeah, from each soldier's perspective, I'm sure. Um,
Exactly.
but how does a mission like that get pulled off? Because it does immediately to the layperson, it does sound like something out of a movie. It does sound something like something almost incredible. So how does a mission like that work?
That's a hard question to answer, and kind of for a fun reason. So CSAR, combat search and rescue, there is no solid playbook for it, right? There's not one, all right, we do this and then we do this and then this happens and then we load up on this and then this plane flies over and then we do this. It's a framework that they have to be super flexible within. The actual manual that the Air Force puts out for combat search and rescue literally states that it is unpredictable and everything has to be incredibly flexible with the one priority being speed. The Air Force pararescue forces are insane. They are, you know, the savior, the saving of the pilot and the Wizzo, the weapon systems officer, the backseater is incredible. But I also want people to appreciate the other aspects of it that were insane and that if they didn't happen, I would have made a video probably talking about how it's a terrible idea and it wouldn't work and all this crazy stuff. So maybe take everything I'm saying with a grain of salt. But the fact that we saw videos of mid-air refueling of helicopters in the middle of the day over Iran, that's insane. That is, it's already dangerous in the best of conditions. Doing it in hostile territory, low to the ground, within range of man-portable air defense weapons like, the shoulder-fired missiles that you see in movies and stuff. Um, that's insane. And the fact that we set up a FARP, what people are calling an air base, right? We set up an air base in the middle of Iran to FARP, forward arming and refueling point, flat area of land where you bring in a bunch of sacks essentially full of fuel and ammo, and you just kind of spread them out, and you have little apparatuses that you fly in that you can hook up to the aircraft and whatnot. But that's also insane. I think how it went down really shows the political volatility of this whole thing because if if that rear seater, the one that was behind enemy lines for 24 hours, if he'd gotten captured, I truly think this whole scenario would be a completely different. It would have changed how we're doing this entirely. And the US knew that, Iran knew that, and because we didn't have forces in Iran, right? The entire IRGC essentially was looking for them at once with civilians and everything else. And so we knew that, we knew the political implications of it. So we threw literally everything that we had. And that's why we brought in uh, extra firepower in the form of helicopter, like attack helicopters, the AH-6 Little Birds or the MH-6 Little Birds. I forget which one specifically. Those are, the tiny flying called killer eggs, right? They have the miniguns on the side and they're all cool and they do crazy tricks and stuff. And only the cool guys get to use them. But we threw everything we had at that. And it is insane, right? Because we were able to detect where they were, but because everyone's looking for them, the Wizzo couldn't communicate as much. And then you're hearing the stories of the CIA using the heart AI powered heartbeat sensor. uh, that is insane. I guess, big picture, not surprised that they have a toy like that can detect a heartbeat from kilometers away and filter out all the other noise. I'd love to. Hopefully, more comes out about that because that's one of the more things I'm interested in. And I don't say any of this to discredit. I'm kind of a Debbie Downer, a little. If you haven't noticed, I apologize. But and I don't say this to discount any of the people that were on that mission because again, it was so dangerous and risky and politically sensitive. It required such a high level of skill and training and just flat out courage, to use a simplified word, to do. It's absolutely insane to me that we were able to pull that off, how we did it. Um, but I would caution people to look at it as some kind of proof of anything, of proof that uh, that we could just keep doing this and do it over and over again. right? One of the reasons we were able to throw everything, we were fine with bombing, two cargo aircraft and having an A-10 shot down while performing close air support on it, or sending helicopters into harm's way that did get hit and did injure people, um, is because we didn't really expect that to happen again. The details of the shoot down, I still haven't seen them. Uh, could have been a fluke, could have been luck, if you want to call it that, bad timing, complacency on our part. There's a million different factors that would make it not a systemic thing that we need to worry about would happen again and again and again. Or simply we just adapt our tactics, which is fairly simple to do at that level. It doesn't mean we could do this again and again and again, right? We are now down several aircraft because of that mission. A lot of people got hurt, and that's okay if we assume we don't have to go out and do it again, right? We don't have an unlimited stockpile of specialized aircraft that are very hard to create, harder to find and train people up on. In a more conventional war, if you want to say, insert whatever big bad guys in your brain when I say conventional war with someone else. I'll leave that one to the viewer. We wouldn't be able to do something like that. We would need to reserve some of those assets for other missions. So, we would need to expect that some pilots are going to get captured. We would need to expect that some pilots are going to have to hide in the forest for 4 or 5 days and try to survive. We would need to leverage unconventional assets. We would probably lose a few more people. So I say that as and by no means did we get lucky with this. This was very well planned in the short amount of time that we had to do it. We had the assets to do it. We were prepared to conduct this kind of thing. Um, there was no amount of luck involved ultimately, but it was very expensive, both in a metaphorical and in a literal sense. And so I think that was kind of our one, the way I look at it, right? If this happens again in a similar situation where we would have to not wait 24 hours, or we would have to wait 24 hours to go get them, it would be an issue. Because there's two kinds of search and rescue operations that the Air Force, well, not two types, but when a pilot or any kind of air crew is shot down, uh, the immediate decision is, do we go now or do we go later? Um, and the F-15 shoot down that we're talking about here was an example of both, right? The pilot went down and the backseater, the Wizzo, went down. The pilot, and we don't know why this is the case yet. The pilot was down in an area where we knew where he was and we could go get him right now, and we did. We got him fairly quickly. I won't say immediately, but very quickly. It was the backseater that had to wait for 24 hours. We had to conduct other operations to make it so that we had a window to go get him. And even in that window, we weren't able to. We still took a lot of equipment losses, right? A lot of that is due to the timing factor, right? You don't have a time. You don't like. All right, in a normal deliberate sense, this kind of operation would take weeks to plan, and combat search and rescue guys get no time at all, mi less than 24 hours to pull all those kinds of assets and all that with little to no time for rehearsals, if any. So, and that's also just a testament to how highly trained these guys are, that they didn't need time to practice it as much because they're already so highly trained to such a high degree that they can do it like this. Um, so it's an incredible thing that it happened and that we were able to put the assets in place. I would also use that as a cautionary tale if you look at how it could have been worse.
And finally, I wanted to ask you about some of the technology that's been deployed in this war. Are we seeing any new exciting? I don't know whether it's forms of weaponry or planes or ships, or is there anything that's caught your eye on that front? Of course, we mentioned the AI tools used by the CIA, and there's been a lot of discussion about the use of AI in targeting. Yeah, what kind of things caught your eye on that domain?
So Epic Fury has seen the deployment of two different systems for the first time. The new it's called a Lucas drone. It's like low cost something something. It's one of those backronyms, right? We came up with a word and we figured out what the it would stand for later, which is essentially a higher tier copy of the Iranian Shahed, which the irony is not lost on me. And that has proven to be very effective. We've seen a lot of footage of it. Imagine just a big flying triangle with a lawnmower engine on the back with a propeller and a warhead. And ours are more advanced than the Iranians. I would hope so. Oh, and they're for relatively cheap too. So this is the our first deployment of those. I won't speak numbers because I know I'm gonna mess it up, get it confused with the other assets. I'm trying to use my brain, but the Lucas drone really represents the United States' first step into what I would argue is what 21st century warfare is. Uh, Unmanned swarms of cheap loitering munitions, not just highly expensive, highly specialized, bespoke missiles that have to be launched from an equally expensive thing and cost billions of dollars. The Lucas drone, I want to say, only costs about 30 grand, which to you and me, a lot of money to the United States military pennies, essentially. Uh, and so I think we're gonna see a lot more of that. Another thing that's also interesting about those is that we only put them in operational use in November, I believe, and we only started building them in early 2025. So that rapid turnaround, I think, is hopefully a sign of things to come in terms of the United States rapidly turning around cheap, expendable munitions and equipment that's more suited for what we're seeing in the 21st century, right? Conventional style warfare, not counterinsurgency kind of things that we got so used to uh, over the 20 years of the GWAT. And so the Lucas drone's a big deal. Um, it's it's basically just a it doesn't go as fast as a missile. It's easier to shoot down compared to a missile. Uh, One could argue it's not a good one, but it can be launched before we have targeting data, meaning it can just kind of hover over an area, and then once we find something, eventually, then it can hit. As opposed to a missile where you have to do this long kill chain that goes back and forth, trying to get everything in the perfect place. A Lucas drone, you have your little launcher, you stick it on the ground, send it out, and it's on its way. It's the exact kind of munition that the United States needs in the future. And so hopefully if anything, we've gained some insight on how we can improve it, how we can use it better, where it needed work, where it really excelled, maybe where it didn't expect it to, all the lessons learned and all that. The second thing that we've seen, and I briefly mentioned it earlier, is the PrSM missile, the precision strike missile. It's the U.S. Army's ground. Exactly what you think of a missile, right? You got a launcher on the ground, shoots out, flies, explodes. Um, and those are relatively new, and this is the first time they've been used operationally. And we used them so much, so we ran out. And I know I said that in a very cynical sense earlier, but really the main reason we ran out of them is because they're new. We haven't had a lot of time to build up a stockpile of them, and uh, and they were in theater. They're easier to transport compared to other things. So use them. They're effective, and those are replacing uh, the older ATACMS missiles that you hear a lot of in the discourse between us sending things to Ukraine and stuff like that. So the prisms are kind of the new kid on the block, so to speak. And from what I've seen, they've proven very effective. It's not so much revolutionary in the sense that we've had missiles that you can launch from point A, fly in the air, hit point B, explode. That's not itself impressive. Um, but it's showing a greater shift in US strategy because you look at Russia and China, they've had these kind of medium short range ballistic missile technology for a very long time now, and there's reasons for that. It's because they the limitations of their air force in the Cold War and US Air Force. We basically in the Cold War, we put all our money into planes. Russia and China figured out, hey, we can't match them with planes. We still need to fire missiles. Let's build ones you can launch from the ground. And so prisms represent the our acknowledgement that yes, we have stealth fighters. Yes, we have all these fancy aircraft that can do all these cool things, but they're going to hit a point where uh, they're not as effective, or could get shot down. More threats to them. This, that, and the other. And so it's a shift in doctrine, and it's one of the big things with prisms is they were intended for the war with China, essentially, because you needed the ground forces needed organic long range systems that could shoot longer distances, right? Because if you're in the Pacific and you're fighting on islands, you can't just be like, oh, well, we need to drive into the range of the next island we're going to attack or defend, or you don't have that option. So you need something that can shoot from a long distance and hit all the targets you would possibly need it to. And so I think, and I hope that with the Prism as well, that it's one, it's a warning that whatever we need to build them faster and more of them if we want this to be more of an effective weapon system that we can use at scale and not run out. Uh, and two, kind of the acknowledgement that we are focusing on these long range precision fires over. We're not assuming that we're going to have total air dominance. It's a representation that the United States is no longer assuming that it's going to be an easy kick in the door. We own it instantly. Everything's good. It's a kind of, in my mind, a return to reality from the mindset that we got over the last 20 years in Iraq and Afghanistan, where we could do anything at any time, anywhere. And so that's kind of what Prism and Lucas represent to me. Are they revolutionary designs by any means? Not really. The Lucas is a copy of something else. The Prism is a short range ballistic missile, which humanity has been building for 60 plus years. But it's a big shift in how the United States is thinking. And I think that's the more important part.
Mm, that makes sense. And final question: is there anything um, that people don't quite understand about this war, how it's being fought? Perhaps is there a dumb question that we haven't answered in the past 50 minutes or so?
What the Probably the biggest thing that's given me a headache that I've read people talk about is the confusion between how to achieve big strategic goals, right? Winning, not losing, whatever, straight open, straight closed, the big picture items, and how the United States' successes at a smaller, call it tactical level, right? Blowing up this, blowing up that, flying this plane here, putting this person here, why those successes are not translating into achieving those strategic goals. Um, eh, and because people see that we're just blowing up everything under the sun in Iran, and they're like, oh, we're instantly winning, right? Because the numbers, if you look at a spreadsheet, says this, right? Without considering the fact that what those numbers actually mean, all this other stuff. So I caution people to say that any side is winning or losing in this specific conflict. I won't make it a universal law, but in this specific conflict, where it's not just a war of attrition, right? There's a lot of political will, there's a lot of political goals, there's differences in motivation. You can't just look at the United States blowing up a bunch of stuff, bragging that we decimated this, that, or the other. And I hate that they say decimated. The United States says decimated on everything, because in a literal sense, decimated means you only destroyed 10% of something. I just
Yeah,
want to get that out there. I've been trying to put that out in the world.
the
It's literally
original
what that
Latin
means.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah, if you want to say destroyed completely, you say annihilation, because that means turn into nothing. Anyway, so be cautious when you hear, the US decimated this or annihilated that or destroyed this X number of this, and they have lacked this ability to do anything. Because right now the strategic picture is focused on the Strait of Hormuz. That is whatever strategic outcomes that the United States entered this with, ignore them. Right now, it's all about the Strait. That's all the negotiations are about. That's where all the military focus is on right now. And so those strategic goals cannot just be achieved by blowing everything up, right? Iran right now is in an existential war with the United States that they've been planning to have since the revolution in 79. The United States is fighting a war of economic convenience, to put it harshly, right? We are not of Iran is not going to take over the United States and plant their flag, right? Iran has a very real threat of that. And so they are willing to absorb losses and do anything it takes to retain power and the regime, while the US, it's unrealistic for us to have that kind of political will because, you know, we start we you know, we fired the first shots. We they're not going to come over the Atlantic, right, and start landing troops on Washington. They're not going to start flying their jets over New York and hitting targets. And so I really need people to appreciate there's a lot more nuance in what winning versus losing looks like than just, you know, putting up a graph being like, this is how much stuff we blew up. And look that we flew a plane over, Tehran. It didn't get shot down. So we are winning. And so I think that kind of answers some of the disconnect that people are having between the tactical successes, which we are undeniably having in a vacuum, to the what I would call the strategic failures of the United States to open up the strait, enforce sanctions across everything, all that other stuff. Blockade might change that. That's kind of a mixture of strategic and tactical goals. Um, but yeah, it's like I said, more complex, more boring, less exciting, but also more exciting in that sense.
Justin Taylor, thank you very much.